All right, hello, students and teachers, parents, and panelists. Welcome to my talk about the correlation between gender and poverty in East Java. So first of all, let me ask you a quick question. How many of you know or have heard the term women's poverty?
Yeah, me.
You have? You have to? Good. The thing about women's poverty is because I've noticed it's becoming a little more prevalent these days. There's a bit more talk that I've heard, at least in my opinion. There's a little bit more talk about how women have it harder in a men's world. I mean, that kind of does make sense. Most of the top things in the world are run by men. But another thing I want to focus on is poverty in Indonesia. 9.5% of people in Indonesia are living in poverty, and 2.5% of them only have around $2.15 to live per day. For comparison, that's around 30,000 rupiah per day. That is a surprisingly a little amount of money. Now, tying this back to women's poverty, they say that women tend to be poorer than men. They tend to be poorer than men in this world. And at first I thought that there might be some sort of sexism at play over here. What if the society that we live in right now tends to favor men over women? Now, I then decided that maybe that's not the case. My hypothesis for this research when I came into this is that it's not the gender that's causing there is no correlation between gender and poverty. Just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you become poor. That was my original hypothesis. Because the thing about the world, or at least East Java, which I'm focusing on right now, it's a big province. We're the second largest province in Indonesia, and Indonesia has over 200 million people living in it. With that big of an environment and that much of a culture, it can't just be gender that's determining this. So I ended up doing some background research, and I figured that maybe the real problem is spending habits. You probably all know the stereotype about how women are the people that kind of spend. They like to spend money on different things or different fashion brands or whatnot. I figured that could be one reason why there is a thing called women's poverty, because of that stereotype. Whether it's true or not, the fact that it's managed to persist until today means that maybe there could be some truth to it. Maybe. But there was a second factor that I also thought about, the patriarchal system of Indonesia. Because Indonesia is pretty much almost run by males at this point. Most of the families living in Indonesia, all of the money comes from the men. The husbands are the breadwinners of the family. They're the ones that make the money. They probably control the finances as well. It's also a bit of a gender norm for a woman to be the one that tends to stay at home and to cook and clean and make sure the house doesn't burn down because of the kids and everything. So those were two factors that I went into this, but we can't just base off a conclusion just by reading up past research papers. So to actually get more information to this, I made a questionnaire. I made a Google Forms questionnaire, and I managed to get 62 adults all over from Surabaya to come and answer it and give their own input on their own financial situations. I also managed to contact two people. The first one is Miss Agnes, she's the economics teacher of our class, and the second one is a guy named Nico. He works in finance as well in Surabaya. And I figured that they would be good people to interview about, the financial situation of gender here, all that stuff. Now, here's just a quick disclaimer of what the questionnaire is going to involve. Most of these people that we're answering come from the church, and most of them come from Surabaya. A few of them may be around East Java, but we can't conclusively prove that. So that is something to keep in mind. So, what do we find? Okay. The first one is that most people don't actually receive government benefits. So there is no government favoritism here at all. The government doesn't favor one gender over the other. So at least we got that out of our minds. The second one is that my hypothesis of the men making the money in the family was actually proven to be true. Actually, more true than I ever thought it could be. Because apparently 100% of all of our married respondents said that it was the men that make the money in the family. They're the breadwinners. On top of that, if we actually look across all of the if we look at all of the data that we received from our respondents about how much money they're making per month, most of them are actually making above average wage. These people are living in comfortable situations. Now, yes, there are some people making just average wage or below average wage, But in terms of the big picture, the majority of East Java residents are making comfortable wages. They're making above average wages. Another piece of data that I noticed is that contrary to the stereotype that women are big spenders, most of them are actually savers. Most of them actually save their money, or they have a healthy balance of both. So it's probably not the gender habits that are actually causing the poverty, because we had just destroyed this stereotype by managing to prove that women are not big spenders like we thought that they would be. So let's think about another thing. How about maybe traditional gender norms? Like the traditional gender norm that men are the ones that work out and make the money and do all the heavy lifting, whereas women are the ones supporting the family in the house. That is a real gender norm in Indonesia, and maybe that could be affecting what is going on over here. Well, yes, these traditional gender norms may have limited access to high-entry jobs for women, but the thing is, they're still possible. When I asked Miss Agnes and Nico about how easy it is for a woman to get a high-ranking job here, they actually said that many companies here offer equal opportunities. Miss Agnes actually said that there has to be many factors that come into play for a company to be able to favor one gender over the other. And Surabaya is kind of lacking at that, actually. And Nico straight up says that that doesn't exist. Many companies provide equal opportunities for jobs. And it's even possible to get into high-ranking jobs. How many of you know about the mayor of Surabaya right now? You probably know at this point that she's a woman, right? That already proves that it is already possible. And I've already noticed that there's also more female candidates for the next mayor of Surabaya, which proves that it is actually possible for women to actually get into high-ranking jobs. So, what's the deal with women's poverty here then? Well, we'll get to that later in the conclusion when I tie up everything together. Another thing that I have to remind you is that most of our respondents were making above average wage. 64.3% of the single females that they managed to get a hold of said so, 41.2% for our single males, and 54.8% for our married people. So let's move on to something else. What about the wage gap? How many of you guys have heard about the gender wage gap? How women tend to get paid less than men? Well, the interesting thing that I found was that our two people that I interviewed had conflicting opinions on it. Ms. Agnes said that it was a real thing that existed, and that's something that we desperately need to change, which is the reason behind women's poverty. However, Nico straight up said that it doesn't exist, that it's straight up that your wage is affected by how you work. It was really interesting to see two experts, in a way, have conflicting ideas with each other. And it proves that this situation is far more big and far more complex than I originally thought that it would ever be. I was not prepared to fully explore into this. And if we actually look at the respondents' data from what we got, there is no conclusive evidence to actually prove that there is a gender wage gap or whether there is no gender wage gap. We need to do more research into this if we actually want to conclusively prove whether there is a gender wage gap or not, and whether it's just based off your performance. Now, what about the patriarchal system? Since men tend to make a lot of money in the house, pretty much all of them make the money in the house, that means they might be controlling the finances. This is a male-run world that we're living in right now, and we have to all admit it. But we also have to keep in mind that both Ms. Agnes and Nico said that both men and women get equal job opportunities. Now, what this could mean, in my opinion, is that women are choosing to not work if they're married because of these traditional gender norms, in my opinion. Keep in mind that most of these people are already making comfortable wages. 54.8% of our married respondents were already making above average wages. They're living comfortable lives as it is. So they probably won't need that much more money than they already have right now. They're already comfortable as it is, like I said. So they don't need another woman to be working unless if they're in a financially bad situation. So with all of this data that I managed to get from experts and the questionnaires, what can we conclude with this? Well, I'll be the first to admit that this is a complicated issue, and I don't believe that this can be answered with a simple yes or no. But there are 5 things that I want to bring note 2. The first one is that there is no gender-based favoritism in the government, and our sample size is a financially comfortable one. All of the people that we interviewed tend to be making an average wage or above average wage. And 2, despite the equal job opportunities offered to both men and women, men still tend to be the breadwinners of the family. Every single married person that we interviewed, that we managed to get a hold of for this questionnaire, said that it was the men making the money in the family. So maybe these married women don't work out of, are choosing to not work by their own volition, by their own choice. 3, spending habits don't determine poverty. Most of these people actually save their money or have a good balance between both. I actually had another question where I asked these respondents how much of their money do they save? And the middle value was around 70%, and their other 20%. Actually, no, 70% of the money is used for needs like housing, transportation, food, and the other 20% is stored away for safekeeping. These people have a healthy balance of saving their money and spending it. 4, the experts are even the experts are conflicted over the existence of a gender wage gap, and the sample size and the responses that I got don't give a conclusive picture either. So yeah, it is sadly an overlook in my research. I did not expect to have to do that. And 5, the patriarchal system may have delegated more power to men, but both experts also claim that both men and women have equal job opportunities. So it may look like so far my hypothesis was correct, that there is no correlation between gender and poverty. But the thing is, this is a far more complicated and far more nuanced picture. We are one of the largest countries in the world with a lot of cultures mashed into one. We're going to have to do a lot more research. We're going to have to get a larger sample size, and we're going to have to start asking more questions to actually get a clear, conclusive picture on the impact of gender and our economic status. But right now, there are 2 things that I recommend that we can do. The first one is that we can continue challenging these gender norms by economic training and education programs to help teach men and women how to start businesses. If everyone can learn how to start a business, I think that would be good for everyone. And the second thing that we could do is that we can also start asking the government to start reviewing their old bills to enforce an equal gender wage gap on companies where they aren't. Because the 2 experts, they're working in different fields. One of them is a teacher here, the other one is working as an accountant. So we need to start enforcing equal wages on companies where there aren't equal wages. Now, just to conclude this, while yes, I will admit that this study was not as effective as I thought it would be, I hope that this research can at the very least serve as a first stepping stone towards a larger research into the impact of gender in our economic status. Because honestly, the last kind of world that I would want to be living in is a world where your future is determined based off the traits that you were born with. I don't want to live in that world. And if we can do more research on this problem, then we can either put our minds to rest knowing that our gender doesn't affect how much money we make in the future, or if there is a correlation, we can start taking steps to fix it. So I really hope that this research can at the very least serve as a first stepping stone towards a bigger research. Thank you.